Man, I have to say, like, I'm a big fan. Like, so when I did my video on Novonix, I had to quickly get up to scratch on battery tech. And I watched all of your videos from Jeff Dawn with Shirley Meng all the way up to, and then I got distracted with and then I got distracted with the solid state battery breakthrough. So that was super, super helpful, which is
Good. Well, that's what I'm going for is, to me, it seemed like there's a big information gap out there. There are these people that go, okay, they created a new patent or somebody's doing solid state, et cetera, but nobody actually digs into it. They take what the researcher or the patent says at face value, and they go, okay,
yeah.
well, that's reality then. It's like, well, I want to see if there's something more to it than that.
I think sometimes, like, because I have a finance background, what tends to happen is we reduce all of these companies into numbers, and it's meant to grow at this rate, and it's these numbers. But I think sometimes we forget the engineering challenge that comes with creating that. It's like, oh, these Tesla people are like these people on Wall Street, like, oh, Tesla haven't made any money yet. But you know how fucking hard that is to create that vehicle like that? It's like borderline impossible.
Yeah.
Like, and then I'm like, how about you go make a battery and then you tell me how hard it is? Like,
Well,
so
yeah,
yeah,
anybody who's like worked on their house, like built a piece of furniture, anybody who's ever made anything should appreciate how fucking difficult it is to pull all these pieces together that have less than a millimeter of tolerance for this massive vehicle. And there's thousands of these parts, and they have to all arrive at the same line at the same time. And you end up with a working product consistently, and not just consistently across like a few vehicles, but hundreds of thousands of vehicles. It's insane.
right. It's like building a vehicle is not hard enough. You have to build a manufacturing plant that fulfills analyst predictions. Like, so, I think for me, when I reached out to you, when I created a lot of my videos, I wanted people to understand the engine, like, not to, I wanted people to appreciate a little bit of the engineering excellence, because Australia is not known for tech. We're not good at this. I mean, we're getting better. We're definitely getting better, but we're definitely not very good at this. So when I did the video, I was really thinking about how do we showcase some of the work that's being done in the field, and still kind of talk about the stock, but show it in a way that people will kind of appreciate Jeff Dawn's research, all the way to Dr. Chris Burns.
It seems like what you're trying to do is go, we have these interesting
People.
companies that have a great potential to make profit, but we need to understand what makes those companies tick and why it's so special, and the uniqueness of the technology. And then you can fully appreciate what these companies are all about. Novonix dry particle microgranulation. My next video is going to be on that.
I have to say the company structure is very odd. Like, I think that's a common thing that people are talking about now, that the stock itself, the company structure is very weird, because the lead value add is not really in the current managing director and Philip Streetbaker, because he's more of a money guy. Like, here's the money, go do your thing. And the true value proposition is actually in Chris Burns and his team, because that's essentially what Novonix is before they bought them. But yeah. Sorry, keep going.
Oh, no, I'm curious about what you're talking about now with the company structure, because I haven't really looked into the company structure. I've been simply looking at it from a market perspective. Is there a market out there for this product? And what exactly is their product, and how do they get the cost down? So in terms of the company structure.
Well, I'll give you a high level overview, because it's still quite fresh in my head. So the company was started in 2013 by Dr. Chris Burns and Dr. David Stevens, right? So that's basically Jeff Dawn's crew. And then what happened in 2017 is that Philip Streetbaker, which at the time, there was a company listed in Australia called Graphite Corp, and they had a natural graphite mine. They realized along the way that synthetic graphite was significantly better than natural graphite as an anode material.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's when they went out and bought out Novonix. So this is where it gets convoluted, because majority of the funding was provided by Philip Streetbaker from his sustainable fund. But where it gets more interesting is that if you look at the board members, and I actually talk about this in my video, in something in battery tech where the barrier to entry is extremely high. It's not something that you just enter into. You need your PhD people. You need a lot of research, right? It's just not something you head into, and it's capital intensive. So if you look at their board members, they have very unusual board members. They have Andrew Laveris, which is ex-Dow DuPont. And I'll talk about this in my video that he used to have, Dow DuPont used to do a ton of research for Samsung. And because he's ex-CEO and now he's the board member for Saudi Aramco, which is basically a company that represents Saudi Arabia. He will be the person that can pull strings like no other to basically pull strings into the top 5 battery tech companies, right? Manufacturers. So you have Samsung, the Chinese company KTIL, LG Chem, and a few others, right? But probably more towards Samsung. And then you have a US Admiral, which is also really odd to be on the board for something that's not really defense-based. So this is where I found a snippet on a talk that was done by the CEO to say that the US Admiral is on the board to help with military applications. And I know you talked a little bit about military applications. You're talking about Army researchers. And that's kind of where I was tying everything together, where you have a US Admiral that's arguably, like, military contracts is probably arguably one of the hardest things to do. Palantir have been able to do that as a data analytics company. But to be able to pull government contracts, you don't submit your CV. That's not a thing you do. You need someone kind of in that existing high power state already to just make phone calls, and then they'll get you through all these troubles straight in the door, right? And also, one more thing that's really interesting is in their team, there's a new team member that was only added maybe earlier this year, and it's actually Andrew Laveris' son. So, and if you look at all the relationships within the board members, Andrew Laveris' son is the VP of business development. He used to work in McKinsey, a lot of the investment banks specializing in transportation. And so if you're in investment banking along with management consulting, you already have very high power kind of connections with top management executives, because that's what you do, right? But again, so this is where if the billionaire's family is involved, they don't go in companies thinking that they'll just make millions, because the opportunity cost isn't really exactly worth it. So the son is also working, which makes a family business. Now, it doesn't stop there, because Andrew Laveris and his son, I forgot what his son's name is, the other board member is I think it's the son-in-law with Andrew Laveris. So it's the board member is a family business, which is super odd to me. And, I was thinking that, in battery tech, will Tesla ever make an acquisition and buy them out? Because they're still very small and they have a very good patent that could be extremely beneficial. Because you talked about a dry layer of electrolyte?
Dry battery electrode.
It's really out of my depth, but I was just thinking from a battery tech perspective that if you can reduce manufacturing costs to the point where you no longer need to treat the materials with a chemical and immediately just dry it, mill it, and then ready to go, and you can increase the yield from 50 to 78 to about 100%. And if you watch Dr. Chris Burns' video with Hyperchange with Gil, there's a very small section that he said the materials that's being wasted, it can be repurposed into a concentric sphere of graphene. And I quote, that's exactly what he said. And I was like, what the fuck? So they can make graphene as well? Because I watch a graphene video as well. So sorry, go on. Yeah, but that's it. That's the spider web, I guess, of stories.
God damn, man. You've been going as deep into the board of directors as I have been going into their patent and the research papers. It's hard to know where to begin there. Now, when he's talking about, I guess I'll start from the last comment you made and maybe work backwards if I can remember everything. Basically, graphite is layers of graphene. So all he's really saying is they're making a sphere of graphite. And it's those, the way that's formed is concentric spheres of graphene, which makes up that graphite structure. Graphene is the base material, and all other like graphite materials, nanotubes, etc. It's all built off of graphene. They're called allotropes, which is basically
Okay.
another, basically means forms of graphene. Now, with the admiral and the military thing, I think that's extremely fascinating as well. I don't know enough about how the military industrial complex works,
I don't
but
know. I
I
don't know
would
how it works either.
imagine having an admiral in there would be extremely useful to them. That gives them an edge in that market. And the US military, one thing I'd like to look up, or maybe you can look it up sometime for one of your videos, this is food for thought, is how much energy does the US military use as a proportion of the entire US energy needs? I think it's something ridiculous, like between 1% and 5% of the US's energy comes from the military, but I don't know if that's completely off or not. But if you just think about that 1 to 5% or whatever it is as a proportion of the US energy supply, if all that needs to be converted into batteries, how much energy is that? I would imagine it would be enough to consume a lot of Novonix capacity. Now, in terms of Novonix being taken over by Tesla, this is something I cover because what I'm doing is a video on DPMG, and then I'm doing a video on Novonix business model. And basically what I say in that video, the preamble of it, is that I don't think Tesla requires Novonix or Novonix requires Tesla. Novonix, it's going to be a year or two before they're producing 2,000 tons per annum, and that's only enough for, say, 30,000 vehicles. And then another couple of years after that, they move up to something like, I don't know, 15 or 20,000 tons per year, which that's still only enough to cover maybe half of Tesla's current production needs. So Novonix's scale is way behind what Tesla needs. And Novonix has their schedule pushed out till about 2030 when they're making about 100,000 tons of material per year. And at that point, the world's going to need at least 2 million tons of anode per year. And that means Novonix would be supplying maybe 1/20th of that. Just to connect the dots, 2 terawatt hours a year is what requires those 2 million tons of anode per year. I think I'm getting all these numbers right. Now, a question that I asked Chris Burns was, this DPMG that you're dry particle microgranulation, my understanding is that the machine that you use for this is commercially available and anyone can purchase it. And he confirmed that. And so basically what they're doing is they're taking an existing machine and they've developed a new use for that tool. So the question that was begged that I could see was, can Novonix license this technology to other people? And Chris said that is something that they're exploring. Say, for instance, something Tesla could do is maybe buy, I don't know, 100 of these machines and then scale this up rapidly. So they don't necessarily have to buy Novonix, and Novonix isn't at the scale that Tesla currently needs. So there's a gap that needs bridged there, and hopefully I'm illustrating that well enough.
Yeah.
Big fish versus small fish. A big fish like Tesla needs suppliers that can supply huge amounts of material and scale in an existing massive supply of materials already. Whereas Novonix is an itsy bitsy company, and it needs 5 years before it gets up to what Tesla's current production needs are. I think Tesla would have known about the dry particle microgranulation, years ago when they first started releasing papers on it. My assumption is that Tesla would have purchased Novonix at an earlier stage if they had an intention to. But, the counter argument could be made that Tesla sometimes buys company before the technology is viable. So I don't know. But I do see a gap there, and something needs to bridge that gap. What could bridge that gap for me would be either licensing, or Tesla makes a huge investment in Novonix in order for Novonix to scale more quickly than they've laid out already. One more point as to what you were saying about Australia and technology. What I think, I've seen a lot of battery research coming out of Australia at the moment, and I think that's a side effect of the mining industry in Australia. They're going, all right, we have all these raw materials. What can we do to make this a value-added product and make more money out of these materials that we're producing? Because there's a lot more money in a value-added product than there is in the raw material. And I saw in one of your thumbnails that you were looking at A2 milk or comparing some other company to A2 milk.
Yes.
And that's
Yes,
kind of
correct.
exactly what New Zealand is trying to do with their, like, for instance, their dairy products. All right, we produce all these raw dairy products. What can we do to add value? And that's
Mm.
spurring a lot of, scientific advancement here in New Zealand, and I think in Australia as well. And I do think the technology sector in New Zealand and Australia are underrated, and there's a lot of great investment opportunities if you're into penny stocks.
Yeah, so that's kind of the interesting thing because a lot of our tech darlings are actually New Zealand based. So Zero's a New Zealand company. I think there was another one that was, oh, actually A2 is also a New Zealand based company, which is another one of our darlings. We don't really have that many. So I think it's getting there. But I think the challenge with a lot of tech companies here is that the access to capital is just not as abundant as you go into the US. So that was one of the challenges that our unicorns, like for example, Atlassian, they didn't want to list here because there was too many restrictions and the access to capital, it's night and day if you go NASDAQ versus ASX. I assume that when I thought about the question of will it make sense for Tesla to make an acquisition, I'm on a similar boat that the production capability isn't enough to supply a company like Tesla. But I think the CEO, what he said is the production facilities is very much driven by customer demand. And if Sanyo or Samsung decides to go hard and want to buy a crap ton of materials, which I think hopefully we'll see at the end of this year when they fulfill their contract with Samsung and see whether the material is actually that legit, then I guess there's an accelerant where it wouldn't really be a question of Tesla making an acquisition, but almost with the battery manufacturers taking a stake in, well, it can go both ways, right? But the point is, I agree with what you said that Novonix doesn't need Tesla because they can supply multiple companies. That's not an issue. Or they can go with battery manufacturers. But Tesla also don't really need Novonix because they'll buy majority of their stuff from Panasonic. So yeah, so I guess from a finance point of view, it's kind of good and bad. Where like if you're not overly reliant on one person or one company, that's good. You're diversifying your income streams. But then I guess the partnership rumors it still has legs, except they just won't buy them out. Like maybe more just licensing, their tech from what you said. I want to ask you one more question. So, do you think that we're gonna see graphene to be more commercially viable in like the next couple of years, and and what that would look like? What would that look like in a world with graphene batteries?
The most likely use case is sprinkling a little bit of graphene into the anode, because the anode already is loaded up with graphite. You're not changing the structure too much by adding a little bit of graphene. Taking a step back, when they manufacture an anode, what they do is they have all these little graphite particles, and then they mix in some binder and they mix in some carbon black, which is kind of a conductive carbon powder. And that forms a matrix that allows the electrons to move in and out of the anode more easily. Now, if you add a little bit of graphene to that, you increase the conductivity significantly, which allows you faster charge and discharge rates. My understanding is that it also would keep the battery a bit cooler because it's more thermally conductive as well. It's something I need to look more into. But from my research on looking at the scaling that's going on with graphene nanoplatelets, nanoplatelets and few layer and single layer graphene flakes, my assumption that is it could be 2 to 3 years away if companies decide it's in their best interest. By adding graphene flake, you're adding expense to the battery, but you aren't adding energy density to the battery. People think that graphene adds energy density to the battery, increases the capacity, but it doesn't. There are ways that you can use graphene to increase the energy density, but primarily what graphene does is it's a power density thing. It allows you to get those electrons in and out more quickly so you can charge and discharge more quickly. If you look at the phones now, I mean, you get fast charging up to what, 20, 25 watts now, which is pretty quick, and that's without graphene. With graphene, you might be able to get an 80% charge in, I don't know, 10 to 15 minutes. I'm just pulling a figure out of the air because it depends on how much graphene they put in the battery. But I would say if they are going to do it, I'm thinking that the production scale will start to get there maybe within the next 2 or 3 years.
Well, the original intention when I reached out to you, and my purpose is that I want to help the Australian audience understand a little bit more between how a battery is constructed, and also, you know, what does that really mean for Novonix? Granted, this is the current state of the battery, and this is where we're moving towards. I think that's kind of the intention. Not too kind of not too complex, but kind of interesting enough that the users can understand the engineering excellence when it goes into the battery, because that's important, right? Like, I mean, yeah, people are just saying, oh, it's a penny stock, is gonna, you know, it's just gonna, you trade the stock and you're gonna make a lot of money. But yeah, sure. But there's actually a very real, like there's real depth to the company in the research. I kind of want to explore that a little bit more. Whether I get views or not, I think it's just for my own self-indulgence reasons that I just want to know, like,
yeah. Well, for me as well, it's, this whole channel is a self-indulgence thing. I have things that I want to learn about, and by sharing them with other people, it creates this virtuous cycle where I share things, people give me feedback, and when I produce content, I go, do I really understand this if I'm sharing it? And I often find that it makes me think harder and it makes me dig deeper, knowing that other people are going to be reading it.
Where I started my channel is you know, I wanted to make finance a little bit easier to understand for everyone else, because I have a startup background. I worked in a startup for like almost 3 years. I think it was traumatic, and it was the best experience I could ever ask for. I kid you not, like I walked in one day, this is my 4th month. We were so close of running out of cash, actually borderline about to go bankrupt. We fired basically like 70% of our staff overnight. Yeah, it was absolutely insane. I walked in, I was like, where is everyone? And then there's only like 6 or 7 of us left. And then the CEO was already crying when I came in. It was just such a traumatic experience. Like, he gave a speech, he's like, I'm sorry this has happened. And it's just, I just don't think like finance people do a very good job in understanding that, like, hey, you know, these are real people and it's a very tough challenge. They can't be reduced to numbers. You got to start with the story, and then you can understand the magnitude of the numbers, because the numbers, it doesn't tell you that much, even though it does tell you some, but like, it just doesn't tell you the all-nighters that was put in on the software, the all-nighters to get a fucking piece of material from somewhere that like you just can't find. So I wanted to do that. And I think, you know, when I watch your channel, I feel more at home, because you didn't leave out it's not like, oh, it's just an anode material. No, what the fuck? No, it's not. Like, so I think I appreciated that. But my upcoming videos are actually on the airline industry. So I have one coming out tomorrow on the airline industry and the future of it. But I would love to kind of do more of a, you know, like piggyback off you. And if you know, and then if you want to talk about Australian, New Zealand companies, I would love to do that, because I think just having a conversation with you is more intellectually stimulating to me than to just talk about numbers. Sorry for rambling, but you know, there's a lot of talk about buy now, pay later type companies right now. And, you know, people just think of it as, you know, a stock that just went off, but people misunderstood that it was really hard to do customer acquisition, because it's actually a double-sided marketplace. That's how the buy now, pay later type company works. It's really tough, because you have to acquire the customers and you have to acquire the merchant side. And then in between, you have to go convince banks that, like, hey, I'm going to borrow money from you and I'll pay you a very low interest rate, but I'm going to pay you back. It's really hard to build the software and the company structure like that. And some people are just like, oh yeah, there's no competitive advantage. Like, what's stopping me to going out to start a company? Well, you can't. That's the thing. Like, if you're willing to put in the next 8 years of your life, not like eating ramen noodles and basically calling every single merchant to make that work, then sure, I still doubt that will happen. But the thing is, they went through a really tough time to make this happen. We can't reduce them to a fucking stock price number.
Absolutely. I hear what you're saying, that like if you see what Elon Musk has done, or a lot of these successful startups have done, the money and the cash will eventually flow as soon as you get the technology right and you get your organization right. And it's just a side effect. So if you really want to understand the nuts and bolts of a company, the balance sheet isn't telling you that. You have to look at the underlying technology, the relationships between the people in that business. Yeah, I totally agree. And this is something that Peter Thiel, when he's looking for people to get into bed with, I don't know a better term to use.
No. He said that. That quote unquote, that's what he said, right?
Okay. Yeah. Well, before you get into bed with somebody, you want to make sure that they have the right character, the right mix of personality traits. And if they have the right character and mix of personality traits, you look at what technology that they're actually working on. But ultimately, in order to get that technology to work, you first need the right people to do that. And then if you get the right people to do that, then after those people are, apply their minds to it for 80 hours a week for years on end, then you might have something viable. And then a few years after that, after it's been growing, you might hit profitability. So you're looking at like a 5 to 10 year incubation period. And it's only then, after maybe 10 years, that you really start getting that money come in. And personally, I love profiting off of companies like that. But the real story starts a lot earlier. And the most interesting part for me isn't the money, it's the technology. The video that I released on graphene like last week, to me, that's one of my most important videos, because nobody's really talking about the industrial forms of graphene and what doors those open up. Because right now, the groundwork is being laid for exponential growth in, say, the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years. You could wait a couple of years to get into that and you'd probably still be safe, but right about now is the time you need to start looking at these companies if you want to make 10, 15, 20, 30x on these companies. There's a product development cycle that takes years for a graphene-based product. Concrete manufacturers, polymer manufacturers, etc. They're not just going to take some graphene and throw it into their product and put it on the market. They're going to do 2, 3, 4, 5 years of testing with this new graphene product before they put it into something. And that's what's happening right now, is the testing. And as soon as that testing is confirmed, then you'll see it in products. And that's probably what's happening with Samsung's graphene battery at the moment. Samsung has been working on a graphene anode material, is my understanding, and they released the information to the public about 2 years ago. Now, it takes about 2 years after you've come out with a so-called breakthrough in the press, it usually takes about 2 years for them to test that and verify it before they start putting that into millions of phones. Now, if it passes that verification process, the next question is, all right, can we get this material cheap enough? And that's why it's kind of a fuzzy, slippery number, where I say it could be 2 to 3 years. It depends on how quickly they scale and how cheaply they can get that material.
I still have so much I want to ask you.
Yeah, we should probably.
Yeah. I think I shouldn't be too selfish and just ask you a crap ton of questions. But I have one more I have to ask you. So, because when I was watching your videos, I was really curious about your background. Do you have a physics background or engineering?
Nothing like that. Like, I had a granddad that was an engineer. I had a lot of people in the family that worked with physical things, making things. So there's a lot of that in the family, but there's only I don't have an engineering background. I just had a really, as a kid, I think what it stems from is I was like a wild Indian. We pretty much did whatever we wanted. Me and my brother were constantly building things, making things. Like, for instance, one time we tried to make a shoulder mounted rocket launcher. we took what we did is we took a model rocket, and they had, they have fins on the back. We put some fins on the front as well, and then we took a piece of furnace pipe, and we kind of greased up the inside of the furnace pipe, and then we took one of those those model rocket button things that like you push it and it ignites it. So we mounted that to the top of it.
Did you try it?
Oh, we gave it to our friend who's willing to do anything because he was kind of crazy. So he fired it. Whoomp. His face is just, it kind of singed off his eyebrows and stuff. It didn't really go anywhere. But
okay.
So after that, his mom saw what happened and our project got canceled. It got put on ice.
Got put out of funding.
But our next step, what we wanted to do is if we could get that rocket to launch, what we wanted to do is take a little baggie of gasoline and make the nose cone so the nose cone is a little bit loose on the tip. And the nose cone, when it would hit something, it would punch down and hit a piezoelectric lighter and ignite the bag of gasoline. That was our theory. We wanted to make a rocket launcher that fired rockets that exploded. So just crap like that. And then I've done a little bit of everything in terms of career. My degree is in business management. And degrees in business management. But I've had, I don't know, 10 or 15 different jobs over the years, from bars and restaurants to installing fiber optic cable to working in a Honda piston factory, doing quality control, a little bit of everything.
That's crazy. That's insane. Because when I watch your videos, I'm like, man, like, I wonder what his master's or PhD is in. Like, man, I really appreciate that. I think, obviously, maybe after you release your Chris Burns video on Novonix, I'm going to touch base again because I want to capture a conversation, like I said, where we can detail the constructions of the details within a battery, where it is currently versus where it's going to go. Because then that will kind of answer some of the questions around the prospects of the company that you probably cover, in your video. So I try and release 2 to 3 videos a week. I can't say I'm really managing my time that well at the moment. I have to be honest. It's hard. It's hard to create these videos. You know how hard it is, especially the stuff that you do. I'm like, man, I feel like you spent weeks on this stuff. You do.
yeah, I do. And like, for instance, this set of anode videos, I've been working on this in the background for 3 months because there's so much missing information.
Oh.
And what I found with the natural versus synthetic anode, that nobody's actually, like, for instance, there's a research paper that came out in May, and that research paper says, to our knowledge, nobody has done a review of the graphite anode material since it was invented 30 years ago. And this is the first review paper. Generally, most technologies, every few years you get like a review paper. So that tells you how little information there is out there about synthetic versus natural anodes.
Yeah.
So anyhow, I'll let you go. We're finished it there. Thanks for your time, and it was good talking to you.
Thanks for your time as well.
All right. Later, David.
All right. Ciao.